Hi everyone. Just take a minute for folks to enter. All right, so let's get started. So hi everybody, I'm excited to dig into my presentation topic a little further with you all. And the way that I've structured this time is by creating a Google Doc. I'll share that in the chat. And on there are a number of steps from my presentation that have corresponding discussion prompts that we can think about and we can answer collectively. So I'm going to send that doc out to everybody. And let me know if you have any troubles accessing that. Okay, so once everyone's in there, I'm just going to take some time to read through the prompts, and then I'll allow about 10 minutes for people to add in their thoughts, and we'll be able to discuss that as a group. Okay, so before I go over this, I'll just add that even though I'm describing these steps in like a linear fashion, that shouldn't be interpreted as being, the prescriptive way of thinking about the steps. I tried to emphasize in the presentation that this process will look different for everybody. Okay, so the first step is identifying community partners, and the prompt for this is thinking about a scoped reparative description project. Brainstorm who within your community possesses expertise that could support your project. So community could mean any number of things. It could be your local community, so thinking about within your institution, which depending on what that looks like could include staff, students, faculty, or you could think more broadly, so thinking about your users or local community chapters of national organizations, something like that. The second step is ensuring mutually beneficial partnerships. So the prompt is thinking about an ideal community partner, brainstorm what sources of funding could be used to pay them a consulting fee. If funds aren't available, what other forms of compensation could be provided? So as I mentioned in the presentation earlier, funding sources could be grants, they could come from a particular donor, come through crowdsourcing or through internal budget lines, and also thinking about if those funds can't be procured, what could be offered in exchange, and specifically, catered to that specific organization. So the third step is identifying and overcoming barriers, and the prompt is, has your institution had existing relationships with community groups in the past that were not equitable? How will you be transparent in acknowledging and addressing this? And I would say even if this is not applicable, it would be good to think about how you'll forefront your positionality, so both as an individual and as an institution when contacting and through your work with these communities. The fourth step is research into community preferred terminology resources. So which community produced preferred terminology guides could be used as a basis for your local guidelines? If these are not yet identified, where will you seek them out, or what other resources and research could you consult? So sometimes terminology guides are not made specifically for libraries and archives. So for example, during my research, I saw a number of resources that were made specifically for media and journalism coverage. So in terms of other resources and research, I also mentioned this in my presentation, that much of this work has and is done in critical race and ethnic studies. So just thinking about those different sources. And the fifth step is documentation. The prompt is, how will reparative description workflows be communicated to users? What form will this take? So keep in mind that your collaborators should also be considered under this umbrella of users. So asking within your documentation, what levels of description will redescription be indicated? So will they be notes in the finding aid or the catalog record? Will you be producing public-facing statements for your library website? And also feel free to include any challenges that you anticipate in this section. And the final step is outreach initiatives. And the prompt is, how will you ensure an ethos of mutual respect and cultural humility extends into outreach efforts? So just thinking about a couple additional things to consider here. How will your efforts support the engagement of users beyond your traditional patron base? And also, how will you be soliciting and incorporating feedback in your work? So those are the 6 questions. So I'm going to give everybody 10 minutes to start answering those. And I'll be here for if anyone has questions or wants some clarification about the prompts.
Jessica?
Hi there.
Hello, this is Arthur. Can you put some of those prompts in the chat so we can have those questions a little closer at hand?
Sure, I'll copy them in there.
Yeah, thank you.
I saw someone shared a really great list of vocabularies in here. So if there are other resources that you want to share out, or case studies or institutions that you feel are doing a particularly good job of developing community preferred terminology guides, feel free to put that in there as well.
This is Mary Miller, I'm the one who shared that, but I'm kind of overwhelmed by this list. I mean, 25 different controlled vocabulary seems like a lot to wrap my head around. And I have a concern about you know, if we sort of I know this is an iterative process, but part of me thinks I should be addressing all the problems at one time, but part of me is saying it would be much more manageable if we, for example, focused on harmful language around African Americans and went through and did all of that and sort of had that kind of focus, and then went back through and made another pass so that we could sort of focus on thinking about one vocabulary set at a time. And I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, I think that's a natural reaction, to be overwhelmed by the amount of work that we have to do. As I mentioned earlier, the way that we're approaching it is on a project basis. So thinking about different scoped collecting areas, and particularly ones at the beginning of our process that already had those established guidelines. So similar to the ones that you've included here, resources from community groups that have already been established. Something else that I noticed just by browsing through this list very quickly is it seems like a lot of these resources could kind of be cross-referenced, and that was also something that we did with our work. We were using 2 primary resources and then consulting with those groups as well. So I think it's helpful to have all these resources because you can think about the way in that they can kind of speak to each other and help you on your project. I'll just give folks a few more minutes to add their thoughts in the doc. All right, so we've had about 10 minutes to add our thoughts in the doc. Feel free to keep adding your answers if you like, but I thought we could take some time to discuss each one and expand upon some of the feedback that you've all added. So for this first section of identifying community partners, I'm seeing that a lot of folks are identifying those within their local community, so thinking about students, faculty, researchers who hold subject matter expertise. And I'm wondering within some of those answers people have put if there's knowledge of existing relationships with any of those communities, or things that you feel like you'll really have to work on to develop partnerships with. So for example, someone added local community center, genealogist. Is that a community that you've worked with in the past? Or would that be someone that you would be reaching out to for the first time?
Hi, this is Jody. I work at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and what I was referring to there are, we have a really large number of antebellum collections, and most of our findings were written with a very academic user in mind, and we are seeing more and more interest in these collections for genealogy purposes, and there's a lot of really harmful and hurtful language in those finding aids, and they also center the white families or white owners in ways that are just really uncomfortable, really wrong, and we're working to correct that. And so that's where some of those options to us that we've already considered, like how, what next steps we can take in order to make these finding aids right, or at least better. I think, getting them right won't ever quite happen. So that's where that came from. And we don't have a lot of local community center partners yet. That's something that we're going to pursue, hopefully in the very near future.
Could I have kind of a question about this? One person suggested ask donors for their preferred terminology when taking in material. That strikes me as being kind of a dual-edged sword, because the people who donated those antebellum resources might not want to be described the way that you're going to describe them. And it's one thing to, if you have an underrepresented group, giving you their resources, but if it's the United Daughters of the Confederacy, do I ask them how they would like to be described? One of the issues that we are grappling with in our archives is the misleadingly neutral terminology with which groups like that are described. And yet, if we're asking people how they would like to be described, do we only ask the people that we like how they want to be described, and then we decide how we describe the people that we don't like? And I'm saying that very loosely, but I think my point is clear.
It is. I hear your concerns. A lot of, for us, those collections were kind of acquired, not necessarily donated by the families, by those white families. And a lot of our language goes way beyond neutral to be very valorizing. Like there are these extensive biographical notes that talk about, all these different members of the white family, their education, where they traveled. And what we're really interested in doing is getting the names of those that they enslaved in the finding aid, having those be findable. And so we also, we don't need these long, elaborate biographical notes. No one comes to our finding aids for those. That information can be found elsewhere. So, in terms of current collections, we do usually ask new donors how they would like to be represented in the finding aids. So.
Yeah, I think, Mary, you brought up a really good point about self-identification and how we as archivists who compose description determine, how one can self-identify, and how that can be really complicated and sometimes problematic. This is something that we've been discussing at our institution. I know that curators are interested in coming up with some sort of template for donors to be able to disclose that kind of information, but we run into some of the same issues that you mentioned. For example, a lot of, in the past, families of folks who identified in the LGBT community wouldn't want to identify their family members as such. So that's something that we're really being cognizant of. And also something that, as a local practice, we make sure that we add information, for example, in the processing information note, when donor supplied description is used, because that context is really important in relation to potentially harmful language. So I think it's something that is complicated and difficult, but I think there is potential there for folks to be able to disclose how they identify, because I think that's really valuable for our users.
That's helpful. Could you tell me where so is it in each individual record that you put the note about a donor supply? Do you indicate each time there's a donor supply description? Do you sort of like quote it or something and then do an attribution there?
Yeah, we'll do it at the collection level, and then if there's a specific series that heavily utilizes donor supplied description, we'll also indicate it there at the series level.
Okay, thank you.
So I just saw a message that we have about 5 minutes left, so apologies, but I don't know if we'll be able to get through every group here, but I was seeing a lot of really great feedback by folks talking about identifying potential funding. This is actually something that I think is really important to talk about in groups like this, in terms of, is this funding actually feasible at your individual institutions? And how can we kind of get around when that funding is being, either we're told it's not available, or we have to put a lot of work and time into procuring that. So I don't know if folks had some thoughts on that, or challenges that they've encountered in that specific area. No one has any challenges, that's great. So I'm just gonna read a comment that Elliot added about, in terms of documentation, I struggle with the idea of providing access to previous versions, both practically and philosophically, and would be glad to hear more about others' thoughts on this. That's a really good question, Elliot. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, that's, a thing that often comes up in these discussions is, do we preserve older versions of metadata or finding aids, and how do we make those available? And from a purely sort of technical standpoint, how do you do that in a way that's sustainable and easy to do? But also, what's the value there? What's the potential harm in continuing to keep those as well? It feels like there's some tension there. So yeah, I'd be glad what other folks think or are doing around that.
I don't actually have complete answers to that, but my institution I've actually spearheaded a project at my institution at UT Austin to kind of start this in our description. And what our plan is to just keep older finding aids in holding records and digital holding records. And I mean, with with users in the reading room before, you know, when that was a thing, and hopefully it will be a thing again, we would provide access to holding record material if researchers were interested. And so we kind of saw it as that kind of capability of providing it, and also just to not completely rewrite history, right? Like to be able to maintain historical context and just what has been done before. I don't know if that.
And I think just to add to that, I think at Yale, Jessica or Beinecke, that you have your finding aids in a version control system, which that would be ideal for me because it's manageable over the long term, and you're not erasing history and you're not necessarily continuing the harm, but you're making it transparent what's happening over time. And could be interesting for researchers of, you know, the history of information science and whatnot, just to see the process by which we've changed our language over time. But I agree, I think it is complicated, and it can be very unwieldy and unsustainable very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. As Adrienne mentioned, that is something that we do by automatically exporting our EAD records into a GitHub repository. So what we're doing now is on the collections that we're undertaking the redescription on, we are adding in processing information notes that indicates to our users that previous versions of finding aids are available. But Elliot brought up a really good point in that, you know, the reason why we're doing this work is to eliminate the exposure to this harmful language. So thinking about, you know, even though these are being seen as previous version of finding aids, we still have to kind of take into consideration, you know, the harm that this language may do, even if it is being viewed as, you know, prior documentation. So I think Kayla said that we actually have a little more time than we initially thought. Just reading through some of the comments here.
I'm wondering if you guys have discussed at all, like I see that there's these other vocabularies, right? But I'm wondering how much kind of conversation has been done so far on like one purely like kind of taking over Library of Congress subject headings, you know, like redoing subject headings and redoing vocabularies and descriptions. Like I'm wondering if there's been any work done there yet.
When you say redoing vocabularies, do you mean making revisions or changing library?
I guess I mean like, sorry, I'm not really wording this as well as I would like. I guess I mean like having a thesaurus that we can all access. You know, have we talked about this yet, or how do we get that started? And I know that there is beginning work on, you know, creating new subject headings and things like that. But I'm just wondering if it's been talked about at all yet.
I know in the realm of subject headings, which I'm a little less well-versed in, but there are folks within our task force who are involved and interested in that work. I feel like there is a project that is a little more centralized, but in terms of actual preferred terminology resources, I haven't seen any initiatives that would seek to kind of combine those. I could see merit in just having, you know, all those resources compiled in one place, but I think it does get a little tricky when thinking about how are we don't want to kind of like create this prescriptive way of creating description, so saying this is like the be-all end-all of preferred terminology. I think that's why you kind of see these resources that span such a wide range of you know, scopes and communities. And I think there was even a comment in here which is really important. And I'm not finding it now, but I remember it being something to the effect of, what do you do when you kind of have conflicting ideas about what preferred terminology can be, which even within our pilot project, we kind of encountered that, because there are different groups of communities who can speak for, you know, who are interested in speaking about the experience of Japanese American incarceration. So sometimes there's discrepancy between how formerly incarcerated people talk about it, scholars talk about it, you know, family members or family of survivors. So that's something that we had to kind of think about and have a lot of discussions with the different community groups, who have also had a lot of different discussions with those community groups. So I think that is good to keep in mind, that it's not really the end goal to have this kind of definitive resource for what language to use, because you know, that kind of runs the risk of collapsing differences, which are really important to maintain.